so I spent a lot of time on incel forums, like, and so I guess what I found is that like there's something kind of profoundly, I guess, relatable to me about the like obsessive like self-abuse that a lot of like incels have, right? This kind of putting themselves down all the time, and to the point of like physiologically, like anatomically analyzing their defects in great detail. And that, it reminded me, I guess, of a lot of like the uglier trans faces online, which in a different, in a kind of different context, involve exactly the same thing, which is like a kind of an obsessively negative, self-harming analysis of your own anatomy, the black pill, right? That's what incels call it, the idea that, because of their, inferior bone structure, that they are doomed by nature to have a lonely life.
I want to take a second here and break down the implications of what Contrapoints just said. If a transgender person, a man who feels like a woman, is said to be born into the wrong body, then one might ask, is an incel, a man who is born with a very weak chin and is disgusted by his own physical appearance and feels that he'll be doomed to a life of loneliness, was he born in the wrong body? How about someone who was born deformed or severely disfigured? People use that phrase a lot, but the reality is, of course, no one actually is born in the wrong body. That is technically a religious metaphysical claim, and no one is required to believe that any more so than they're required to believe that Jesus was literally the Son of God. Gender dysphoria is a form of body dysmorphia, and the gender ideologues who rationalize otherwise are doing a deep disservice to many desperate and confused people, many of whom are young children. And there are plenty of morally detached members of the medical industrial complex who have no problem rationalizing this gender identity extremism because it happens to be very profitable. This does not mean, however, that there aren't gender dysphoric people who benefit from medical interventions. The human psyche is complex and diverse. In one of my gender studies classes, we watched a documentary called Whole. It's about individuals who suffered from a kind of body dysmorphia that made them want to amputate perfectly healthy limbs.
I carried out the content of a lifelong obsession that my legs should be amputated. And I felt absolutely as if transformed.
And these people went on to live meaningful and fulfilled lives. So surely if there are people who can live a fulfilled life after amputating a healthy limb, there are definitely people who benefit from gender reassignment surgery as adults. And people as supposedly as transphobic as Abigail Schreier will be the first ones to admit this.
So I think we should probably establish some things like up front, right? Some people surely as adults are transgender.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course. I interviewed a lot of them.
And we fully support that.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay.
I have friends who fall into that category, okay? Many of whom are amazing people. They, went through mental health, therapy, and they made this decision. They suffered with discomfort in their bodies from the time they were young. And as adults, they made a decision to transition. Fully support them. Has nothing to do with my book.
The problem, however, is that the massive increase in reported gender dysphoria amongst children is clearly the result of social conditioning. And whether they admit it or not, this is actually exactly in line with what many gender ideologues believe.
There is a difference. There is biological sex, and a lot of times people are conflating sex and gender. So there's biological sex, and then there's gender, and that's a social construct in the sense that just because you're born biologically a female doesn't mean you automatically want to vacuum, for instance, which is usually a feminine activity or conflated that way.
Agreed. In other words, someone's gender identity is clearly influenced by social conditioning. And if you're a young child whose brain is still developing, then stuff like this might just have an impact on how you perceive what gender you think you are or are not.
Hey guys, it's Jamie, and today I'm going to be talking about how to know if you're trans.
It's the most amazing and powerful experience that you could possibly have. And for me, it's been so rewarding.
Think a little bit about the discomfort that you're feeling with your current gender or your current gender role. Is the discomfort coming from a place where you are uncomfortable with certain gender expectations that are being put upon you?
So if you're asking the question, am I trans? The answer is probably yes.
I didn't feel safe or happy or secure enough with myself to publicly go shirtless to the beach ever. I would wear a binder, but I would feel too self-conscious, or I would experience very bad interactions with people who just did not agree with who I was. We're in the park, we found a pretty good spot, and I'm ready to take off my shirt.
And I can only find 2 videos on how to get HRT through Planned Parenthood. So I'll just share my experience with you guys.
Here's the needle. There's the estrogen inside of it. Okay.
Yeah, it was kind of an echo chamber for me where everybody was telling me to do it. And as soon as I started it, everyone was telling me how much more attractive I was. They were going through all my older pictures and saying, wow, you looked really unhappy, but now you're so happy. And that was a lie because I really wasn't happy, but everybody was telling you that you were happy, so you felt that you had to keep going with it.
One's gender identity is clearly influenced by social conditioning. That's what it means for it to be a social construct. But social constructs are built on biological foundations. The fact that most jobs that require physical strength are dominated by men, or the fact that there is a significant pay gap between male and female models in favor of the latter, all probably has more to do with biology than it does social conditioning, although social conditioning does play a role. There are average differences between male and female personalities, and consequently the gender roles they take on in society, and that's a biological fact. But that doesn't mean that there aren't individuals who fall outside of those statistical averages, nor does it mean that those people don't have a place in society.
You know, if someone asked me, do I believe that there are gender fluid people? I would say yes. And I would say, a young man who's gender fluid, I know what he's like temperamentally. He's high in agreeableness, he's high in neuroticism, so he has a feminine temperament. He's more interested in people than things, and he's extremely high in openness. And so his temperament is fluid. He's creative, and so he's one thing one day and one thing the next. And his fundamental temperament is tilted towards the feminine. But that doesn't mean he's not a man. There have been people who play at the edges of gender identity forever. And fair enough, and sometimes that's even admirable if it's done in a sophisticated way, and it's charismatic. So you see it in Mick Jagger, you see it in David Bowie, you see it, and you see it in people like Madonna as well, because Madonna had a hard edge, you know, that was very masculine, and all the Marvel superhero women have a hard masculine edge. And so we find that charismatic because those people are also integrated.
So by acknowledging the biological realities for what they are, and appreciating the fact that there are parts of our identities that we don't have control over, but instead have to learn to integrate as part of our personalities and manifest all the potential that exists within us, we don't have to bow to confused and narcissistic gender ideologues who shout platitudes like trans women are women, and then claim that doing so is the same as fighting for civil rights. Trans people are people, and people don't need to be lied to or condescended to in order to be given the same respect that should be afforded to everyone else.
You know, everybody's always like, one of the things they ask me is like, you know, well, what does it mean to, whatever, live as a man or whatever? And I'm like, you know what? All I know is that, yeah, my biology is female. I transition because it just works for me. That's why. And also, I'm not going to claim that my experiences are exactly like Paul's. I would also say, like, you've had your whole life to, right, evolve and be a man, and you have those experiences. I have to adapt to those experiences. So that's why, like, I feel when people are like gender identity, it's innate, it's authentic, and all this stuff. Like, okay, yeah, I might have been dysphoric as a kid, but for me to sit here and say I've always been a man, it's bullshit. You know, it's bullshit. I've always felt dysphoric, but that could have meant a lot of different things.
So remember, always say what you believe to be true as best as you can, and maybe we will find ourselves a way out of this gender madness. Otherwise, good luck and Godspeed.